When I was in seminary, I went to India. Now, the school I went to had this thing where they would send seminary students to another part of the world to encounter the Christian faith over there, as well as the other faiths that are present. Now, you could sign up for lots of different trips. Some of my classmates went to Mexico. When my wife did this, she went to Oman in the Middle East. And when I signed up, I saw India on the list, and I said, vegetarian, best food I'll ever eat. So I'm on a plane with about 10 other seminary students and everyone else who's going to India. And now the seminary I went to and the students I was traveling with, they, let's just say, I'm a bit more liberal than them. I'm on the plane and I flirt my way into getting upgraded to economy plus, these long legs. So I leave my travel mates behind in the cramped economy, and I'm in a slightly more luxurious economy plus, reading a book, and the seat next to me is empty, and one of my travel mates comes up to say hi, notices the empty seat, and sits down next to me and looks at the book I'm reading. Oh, it's just your average Marx and Freud and Nietzsche and Zizek and Feuerbach, you know, everyone's favorite atheists. He looks at me and goes, oh, it's really great that you read atheists so you know how to evangelize better. That wasn't exactly why I was reading these words. Could it be that God is still speaking even through atheists? I think so. My friend I was traveling to India with did not. We arrive in India. We spend about a week there, traveling around to different areas. One part of our trip was to go to Varanasi, where there's a fantastic temple, not a Christian temple. We spend our day seeing this city, wandering around, tasting, smelling, encountering, hearing, all of our senses alive. That evening, we're back at the hotel having dinner, talking about what we'd experienced, what we've seen, what we've heard. And my travel mates, remember I'm slightly more liberal, they say, oh man, it's really sad seeing such beautiful culture and knowing that it's not going to go to heaven. God is still speaking, maybe even through other faith traditions. Amen. God is still speaking. The question is, are we listening? Now, today in the text, Lyle read about a man named Peter. Peter, one of Jesus' best friends. This happens after the whole Jesus stories. This is when the church is just taking off. And at this point, the church is primarily a Jewish thing. We think of it today in like, oh, we live in New York, there's this Jewish seminary uptown, all sorts of things. At this time, the first Christians, they identified still as Jews, with all the cultural implications that meant. Peter, a good Jew, is up on the roof, getting a little hungry, which often means your blood sugar's low, you never know what you're going to think of, and he has a trance, a vision, a dream, and he sees this sheet being lowered, all four corners, filled with animals. Now first, let's imagine that for a moment. The sheet being lowered, animals, snakes and lizards and cows and pigs, all sorts of animals. The sheet, the four corners, these animals are stuck in the middle, a giant hammock of ham. Hammock, there we go. And any good Jew is going to see this and go, nope, that is not on my menu. These unclean foods are all getting all touchy. And Peter hears God say, Peter, kill and eat. Peter goes, I must not have heard that right. That can't be what God is saying. I'm a good Jew, and God has always told us Jews that we don't eat these things. Peter, kill and eat. And about that time, ding, the front doorbell rings and the microwave goes off and Peter heads down for lunch and to meet his visitors. perplexed, the text tells us, perplexed by this vision he just had. Now, Peter, with this vision still running around in his mind, this sheet of unclean animals, Peter meets these visitors at the door, a group sent from Cornelius, a Gentile. Cornelius, a centurion. Peter welcomes them in, and what happens next changes the church forever. Now let's step back for a moment. We've understood about the food thing, about how Peter's confused about his stomach being hungry, and for the first time he's craving bacon. And then we get to the door, and this is where Peter meets somebody that changes his life and the life of the church, Cornelius the centurion. Now, many of us might have an idea of the dichotomy between Jews and Gentiles, but this is doubly so. This is Jew-Gentile, Peter Cornelius, and also Jew-Centurion, the people who are holding your people captive, so to speak, in your own land, the ruling powers of the day. It's doubly othered. Now, I think the dichotomy that lives there, sometimes we get it, but I think there's ways that we can think about those schisms in our world that help us better understand the disparity in that first century world, the Jew-Gentile, the Jew-Centurion disparity. I think it's kind of like the grudge that we see in our culture today between Nicki Minaj and Miley Cyrus. What's good, Miley? Or maybe today is the first day of the football season. I know that because I read the news, not because I watch it. So maybe us New Yorkers, we're thinking it's the schism and the tension between the Patriots and the Jets. Maybe? Oh, that fell flat. Okay, the Sharks and the Jets. There we go. Or just looking at the political landscape and the ways in which there is Republicans and Democrats, and never shall the two meet. Peter enters, and first he invites these Gentiles in, puts them up for the night, and then goes with them the next day to Caesarea to meet this man Cornelius. This is radical. A Jew welcoming the Gentiles, going to the Gentiles' house. I think it's kind of like, imagine a year from now when we have two presidential candidates bickering back and forth, and say the Democratic candidate says something about immigration or LGBTQ or anything of that nature, and the Republican candidate goes, yeah, I think that's a good point. It doesn't happen. Peter, the Jew, walking into the house of Cornelius, the Gentile centurion, and he walks in and says, oh yeah, now it's clear to me what God was saying in my bit of low blood sugar. What God has called clean, I should never call profane or unclean. And so from this point forward, the church radically changes. Suddenly, it's no longer a holy huddle of you look and sound and live like us. It opens the doors to let anyone whom God is calling in to the sacred places of God. I mean, let's just think back in our own world history. Have you ever heard a church tell someone they can't come in because they're gay? What God has called clean, let no one call unclean. Has the church ever had a history with racism? What God has called clean, let no one call unclean. Have you ever been to a church where it feels like a country club and you don't own enough suits to walk in the door? What God has called clean, let no one call unclean. This is the radical and scandalous nature of the Bible. I think the entire Bible is filled with this scandal of God calling the things that people say, and God says, uh-huh. I mean, you see this all the time when we've got prostitutes in the family lineage of Jesus. When you've got a guy running for his life, afraid from his family that they're going to kill him, he takes a nap on a rock and wakes up to say, God was in this place, and I didn't know it. We see a shepherd looking for the sheep that he has left wandering around Mount Sinai, and this shepherd sees a bush that won't stop burning, goes to approach it, and realizes that the ground has been holy the entire time. The divine has crashed into the daily. The sacred is everywhere in both the profane and the mundane. We see this carpenter, itinerant teacher, and all-around rabble-rouser named Jesus crossing all the boundaries he's not supposed to, eating and drinking with those drunks, which probably means he was getting a little tipsy himself. We see Jesus bringing this reign of God to life in ways that it never had been before. We see the followers of Jesus feeling alone and scared, huddled in a room when suddenly they hear the sound of a wind or Darth Vader breathing. As the Spirit of God fills that room and all the earth, empowering them all with God's holy breath. And then we see Peter on the roof, having a vision he doesn't quite understand, and then walking to Caesarea with his new friend Cornelius, realizing that God is always expanding the territory of God because we put up the markers, draw the line in the sand, and God's like, I was on the other side long before you got here. This is the radical and scandalous nature of the Bible, that it is an ever-expanding human consciousness and awareness of God all around us. God is still speaking, but are we listening? The tradition that Middle finds itself in is called the Reformed Church in America. Now, there's plenty of sermons we could preach about that. I think you know them. But the name Reformed, it doesn't just mean past tense. It's reformed and always being reformed. There's a sense of movement. God is up to something, and God invites us to find out what it is. God is still speaking. I love those 4 words. And my favorite 2 are in the middle. Is. That's not some was past tense or some will be someday future tense. Is right now happening in our world. God is still speaking. Now, if the phrase was just God is speaking, that would still be great. But then I might think, well, was there a time when God wasn't speaking, but now God is speaking? And does that potentially mean that God will stop speaking at some point? But when it's God is still speaking, it reminds me that this voice of God has been speaking all along and will continue to speak. The people who sleep on rocks waking up to say God was in this place. The people who stumble across bushes that are burning and realize the ground and all the earth is holy. The people like Jesus who cross all the boundaries, finding God to be on the other side all along. The people like Peter who have visions they don't understand and meet someone like Cornelius, someone who they've written off as the other, and then they realize, oh, God is still speaking through the other too. God is still speaking. Now, when I was in India, I felt very proud of the ways that I could hear God speaking through my atheists, through these other religions. And as I reflect back, I think that perhaps I need a divine Q-tip. Oh, is that some self-righteousness clogging my ear? Is this some so proud of being so open-minded that I'm actually closed-minded to people who are conservative, fundamentalist, or evangelical? What does it mean for us to unclog our ears? What are the ways and the places that God is still speaking, but we're finding it difficult to listen? Through them, God is still speaking? That is the radical and scandalous nature of this God. When you see a group of people, young and old, their skin tones reflecting the full range of humanity, what do you hear? Because God is still speaking. When you see another headline about gun violence and the seemingly endless cycle of violence gone viral, what do you hear? Because God is still speaking. When you see images of refugees displaced and fleeing from their war-torn lands by sea, on foot, whatever means necessary, what do you hear? Because God is still speaking. When you see 50 states allowing any two people to get married in our country, what do you hear? Because God is still speaking. When you're pushing a cart filled with sandwiches on a Sunday afternoon and you see someone who's looking for their meal, what do you hear? Because God is still speaking. When you're in the community room downstairs and you see tables lined up filled with grains and protein and dairy and fruits and veggies ready for the clients of our food pantry to come through, what do you hear? Because God is still speaking. When you see yourself walking down 2nd Avenue on a Sunday afternoon, off to brunch, spending time with friends, heading to the subway, wherever your day might lead you, what do you hear? Because God is still speaking. This isn't about a moment that happened back then when God said something. This is about a movement that keeps on going because God is still speaking. Or to echo our friends in the UCC and to quote the late Gracie Allen, don't put a period where God puts a comma because God is still speaking. Amen.